My parents stood across from me at our family reunion, their voices trembling, their eyes darting to my golden child brother. They weren't asking, they were demanding. $200,000. To save the vineyard he had driven into the ground. My response? I didn't hand them a check. I pulled out my phone and showed them pictures of the brand new mountain cabin I'd bought instead. Their faces, you should have seen the color drain. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or cast aside while your sibling got everything handed to them, this story will hit home. Hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready for one of the most satisfying family revenge stories you'll hear today. Trust me, you'll be glad you stuck around for the ending. I grew up surrounded by rows of grapevines that stretched so far they seemed endless, their twisting branches heavy with fruit under the hot summer sun. To outsiders, our family vineyard looked like a dream, rustic, timeless, filled with the scent of crushed grapes and warm earth. But for me, those fields were less about beauty and more about a constant reminder. I didn't belong. See, my parents had already chosen their favorite child long before I understood what favoritism even meant. My older brother, Ethan, was the golden boy. The heir. The future of the vineyard. If he so much as pruned a vine or walked through the cellar, my parents would beam with pride, talking about how he was born for this life. And me. I was the afterthought. The one who, according to my parents, had his head in the clouds. They said I was too bookish, too quiet, too independent. Whenever I tried to help, my dad would wave me off. Leave it to Ethan. He's got the hands for this work. It stung more than I ever let on. I remember being 16, sweaty from hauling crates during harvest, when my mom pulled me aside. She placed a hand on my shoulder, not gently, but like she was making a point, and said, "Don't worry yourself too much about this place. The vineyard will be Ethan's someday. You'll find your own path." At the time, I laughed it off, but the words branded themselves into me. It wasn't just that they were choosing him, it was that they had already decided I wasn't good enough. Ethan thrived in that spotlight. He'd swagger around the vineyard, boasting to workers twice his age about how he'd modernize everything when he was in charge. Sometimes he'd shove the responsibility onto me. "Hey, carry this, clean that," but the credit? That always circled back to him. My parents adored it, acting like their perfect son was leading the troops. And when he messed up, which was often, the excuses poured in. "He's still learning," Dad would say. "He has vision," Mom would insist. Meanwhile, if I so much as dropped a crate, I'd get a lecture about not taking things seriously. That kind of double standard eats at you. It makes you question your worth, wonder if there's something fundamentally wrong with you. I tried harder, brought home good grades, got scholarships, even helped with vineyard bookkeeping when no one else wanted the tedious job. But every effort was met with indifference. The vineyard was never really about grapes or wine, it was about loyalty, hierarchy, and roles assigned without choice. Ethan was the golden child, destined to inherit. I was the scapegoat, expected to make my own way and watch from the sidelines. And yet, deep down, I knew something they didn't. While Ethan was busy basking in their attention, I was learning what it meant to stand alone, to build something for myself. They didn't know it yet, but those years of being overlooked would become the very thing that gave me strength later. Because when the vineyard began to fall apart, it wasn't Ethan they needed, it was me. By the time I left for college, the roles were firmly set in stone. Ethan stayed behind, stepping into the shoes my parents had carefully polished for him. He was the future, and everyone knew it. They paraded him at community events, introduced him to local vineyard owners as the man who will carry our family's legacy. Meanwhile, I packed my bags and left with little more than a scholarship and the quiet determination to prove that I could stand on my own. My parents didn't come to my send-off. They said it was harvest season and Ethan needed their help. That was their way of reminding me where their priorities lay. College was a wake-up call. For the first time, I wasn't the other son. I was just Alex. Nobody cared about grape harvests or cellar humidity. People respected me for my ideas, my hard work. I discovered something my family never bothered to see. I was good with numbers, with strategy, with making things grow, not grapes, but businesses. While I pulled all-nighters studying finance and working internships, I'd get occasional updates from home. Ethan had bought expensive new equipment for the vineyard. Ethan had hired his friends to modernize operations. Ethan had hosted flashy wine tasting events that drained more money than they made. Each time, my parents praised him like he was a visionary. But when I'd ask about the books, the actual numbers, Mom would brush it off. "Don't be so negative, Alex. Ethan has ideas. You wouldn't understand, you're not here." That became the pattern. Ethan spending recklessly, my parents defending him, and me being told I was too critical. It didn't matter that I could see the cracks forming even from hundreds of miles away. By the time I graduated, I had landed a decent corporate job. Nothing glamorous, but stable, with room to grow. I started saving, investing smartly, and slowly building wealth. Every achievement of mine happened in silence. No celebratory calls from home, no proud words. If anything, they treated my success like a distraction. "You'll come back eventually," my dad once said over the phone. "The vineyard is in your blood, whether you like it or not." But I didn't come back. I couldn't. Each visit home only reminded me of the imbalance. Ethan, strutting around like a king, bragging about how he'd doubled production, even though he was knee-deep in debt. My parents, beaming at him like he was some prodigy. And me, sitting at the table, invisible, wondering how long they could pretend everything was fine. The truth was, the vineyard wasn't thriving. Ethan was spending more than the business could ever earn, and my parents were too blinded by favoritism to admit it. I could see the storm coming, even if they refused to. But here's the thing, while Ethan clung to a crumbling dream, I was quietly building a future of my own. One they never expected. One they couldn't control. The first time I realized how badly things were slipping, I was back home for a weekend visit. I hadn't been to the vineyard in months, and when I drove down that familiar dirt road, I expected to see the place buzzing like it used to during harvest season. Instead, I was met with silence. The vines sagged, untrimmed and heavy, some of the grapes already shriveling on the branch. Inside the main building, equipment sat idle. A few workers shuffled around, their expressions tense, like they were waiting for something that wasn't coming. When I asked my dad what was going on, he shrugged it off. "Just a slow year," he said, though his eyes darted away. Later, one of the older workers pulled me aside and muttered, "Your brother hasn't been paying us on time. Some folks already left." That was the first crack. Over the next couple of years, every visit home revealed another. Ethan was running the vineyard more like a hobby than a business. He threw extravagant tasting events, complete with catered meals and live bands, things the vineyard couldn't afford. He bought shiny new tractors when the old ones still worked fine, financed with loans he never paid down. And every time a bill came due, my parents defended him. "He's taking risks because he believes in the vineyard's future," Mom insisted. "That's what visionaries do." Meanwhile, I could see the truth plain as day. He wasn't a visionary. He was reckless. I still remember one particular dinner where Ethan bragged about partnering with some flashy distributor who promised to take their wine global. He puffed out his chest, saying this was how they'd finally compete with Napa and Bordeaux. My father raised his glass to toast him, and the whole table clapped like Ethan was some genius. But I noticed the fine print. The so-called distributor wasn't a serious partner. It was a company notorious for over-promising and under-delivering, one that required upfront payments for marketing campaigns. When I raised a concern, Ethan waved me off. "You wouldn't get it. You've been gone too long." That phrase haunted me. You wouldn't get it. I got it just fine. He was bleeding the vineyard dry. The most painful part wasn't even watching Ethan fail, it was watching my parents double down on their blind loyalty. They mortgaged parts of the property to cover his mistakes, borrowing against the land my grandfather had worked his whole life to secure. They told themselves it was temporary, that one good harvest would fix everything. But good harvests don't fix bad leadership. And Ethan was a disaster in slow motion. The irony burned deep. All my life, I'd been told the vineyard wasn't for me, that Ethan was the chosen one, the only one capable of carrying the torch. Yet here I was, watching their golden child run that torch straight into the ground. And I knew, sooner or later, they'd come looking for me. The reunion was supposed to be a celebration. At least, that's how my parents framed it when they called me weeks before. It'll be good for everyone to get together again, just like old times. I almost didn't go, but some part of me still craved family, still wanted to believe there might be a shred of connection left. When I arrived, the vineyard looked worse than I remembered. The grass was overgrown, the buildings tired. But inside, they'd done their best to dress it up. Fairy lights strung across the patio, tables filled with food, relatives laughing as if the vineyard wasn't collapsing around them. For a moment, I almost let myself forget the reality. Then, midway through the evening, my parents clinked their glasses to call for attention. The chatter quieted, and my father cleared his throat. "We wanted to share something important with the family," he began, his tone rehearsed. He glanced at Ethan, who stood beside him like a crown prince awaiting his coronation. My stomach tightened. Dad went on about the vineyard, how the past few years had been challenging, how markets were tough, how unexpected setbacks had strained their resources. He painted it like the world had conspired against them, carefully avoiding the truth that Ethan had driven them into debt with his reckless decisions. Then came the bombshell. "We've run into some financial difficulties," Mom said, her eyes sweeping the room before landing squarely on me. "But there's good news. We've worked it out, and with just a little help, we can keep the vineyard alive." "Alex," she smiled, as if rehearsed, "you've done so well for yourself. We know you could help us with a loan. 200,000 would be enough to cover everything." The room went silent. I could feel every eye turning toward me, like I'd been cast in a role I never auditioned for. My chest tightened, heat rushing to my face. Ethan didn't even look nervous. He leaned back in his chair with a smug little smirk, as if he'd known this was coming all along. As if my success existed solely to bail him out. I forced a laugh. 200,000? That's not exactly pocket change. Dad's face hardened. "You've done well. You can afford it. If you care about this family, you'll step up." That line hit me like a punch. If you care about this family. The implication was clear, love was conditional, and the price tag was 200 grand. Mom chimed in, her voice sugary sweet. "It's not just for us, Alex. This vineyard is your legacy too. Don't you want to preserve what your grandfather built?" Inside, my thoughts were racing. Legacy. This was the same legacy they'd told me never belonged to me. The same vineyard I'd been excluded from since I was a teenager. Now that Ethan had wrecked it, suddenly I was part of the we. I looked at Ethan, smug, expectant, and something inside me snapped. The silence after their request was suffocating. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses from another table, the shuffle of someone's chair, but all I could feel was the weight of their expectation pressing down on me. Ethan broke it first. He leaned forward, smirking like it was already settled. "It's just money, Alex. You've got plenty. You're always talking about how well you're doing, right? This is your chance to actually help instead of just criticizing." My jaw tightened. That word, criticizing. For years, any attempt I made to point out flaws, to protect the vineyard, to help, had been brushed aside as criticism. And now here he was, reducing my entire life of independence to a wallet they could open at their convenience. Mom placed her hand on mine. "Sweetheart, we gave Ethan everything because he was meant to lead. But now it's your turn to show you care about this family. Think of it as balancing things out." Balancing. I nearly laughed out loud. There was no balance. Ethan got opportunity, praise, and unconditional support. I got silence, lectures, and reminders that I didn't belong. And now, somehow, they wanted me to balance the books of their favoritism with $200,000. Dad's voice cut in, sharper than usual. "This is about more than money. This is about loyalty. Family stands together in hard times. You'll inherit all this one day too." I looked around at the vineyard, at the sagging vines, the peeling paint, the hollow shell of what it once was. Inherit. This place was a sinking ship, and they wanted me to buy a ticket. For a second, guilt twisted inside me. A part of me, the boy who once carried crates hoping for approval, still wanted to say yes, to be the hero they finally noticed. But the older me, the man who had built a life they never believed I could, knew the truth. Saying yes would trap me in their cycle forever. I took a slow breath, my decision crystallizing. They weren't asking out of love. They were demanding out of entitlement. And for the first time, I wasn't going to give in. I sat there for a long moment, their words echoing in my head: loyalty, family, legacy. My parents' expectant stares, Ethan's smug grin, the silent weight of the room pressing against me. They thought I was cornered, that I'd fold the way I always had. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt strangely calm. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and scrolled for a moment. My mom's eyes lit up, thinking I was checking my banking app, ready to say yes. Ethan leaned back, smug as ever, like he'd already won. Instead, I turned the phone around and set it on the table. On the screen was a picture of a brand new log cabin nestled in the mountains, sunlight spilling over the deck, smoke curling from a stone chimney. "This," I said quietly, my voice steady, "is where my money went." For a second, no one spoke. My mom blinked. My dad frowned, like he couldn't process what he was seeing. Ethan leaned forward, his smirk faltering. I swiped to the next photo, the cabin's interior. Wide windows overlooking endless pines, a wood-burning stove, shelves lined with books. My sanctuary. My escape. I worked hard, I continued, each word deliberate. I saved. I invested. And instead of throwing it all into a vineyard that's been sinking for years, I built something for myself. Something that's mine. Ethan's face flushed red. "You can't be serious. You're just going to let the vineyard die." I met his glare. "The vineyard was never mine to save. It was yours. And you burned it to the ground." My dad slammed his fist against the table, his voice booming. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. "Done for me." I repeated. "You made it clear a long time ago that this place was Ethan's. That I wasn't good enough. Now suddenly, when the bills come due, I'm part of the family again? No. I won't play that role anymore." Whispers rippled through the relatives gathered nearby, the weight of truth settling heavy in the air. Mom's lips trembled, searching for words, but none came. Ethan sat frozen, furious yet powerless. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for their approval. I wasn't fighting for scraps of recognition. I was standing on my own, and the freedom tasted better than any victory they could have offered. I slid my phone back into my pocket, pushed back my chair, and stood. "I wish you the best," I said simply. "But don't ever ask me to clean up Ethan's mess again." And with that, I walked out. I could still feel the weight of their stares on my back as I walked out of that room. For years, I'd dreamed of a moment when my parents would finally see me, finally acknowledge the work I'd done to build a life for myself. Instead, what I felt was better: release. The fallout was immediate. Later, I heard Ethan stormed out not long after me, cursing and throwing a glass against the wall. My parents tried to save face, telling relatives it was just a misunderstanding, but no one bought it. The whispers spread quickly, about the debt, the unpaid workers, the loans they'd taken out against the land. The golden boy's shine had dulled, and people finally saw the cracks I'd been pointing out for years. Over the next months, reality caught up with them. Creditors circled. Workers who hadn't been paid took them to court. Distributors pulled out of contracts. Ethan's name, once spoken with admiration in the local community, became a punchline. He filed for bankruptcy, dragging the vineyard down with him. My parents, desperate, called me over and over. Long voicemails, guilt-soaked messages, pleading texts. "We can fix this if you just reconsider. Think of the family name. Think of your grandfather's legacy." But I didn't answer. Each time the phone buzzed, I'd glance at the screen, then turn back to the fireplace in my cabin, listening to the logs crackle as snow fell outside the window. That silence, choosing not to respond, was its own kind of revenge. Not the loud, vengeful kind people imagine, but the quiet kind that cuts deeper. For once, I wasn't their safety net. For once, they had to live with the consequences of their choices. When the vineyard was finally sold off to cover debts, I drove past it one last time. The vines were overgrown, the sign faded, the air heavy with loss. And yet, I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. Because the truth is, the sweetest revenge wasn't watching them fail, it was refusing to let their failure become mine. Looking back now, I realize something important. Revenge doesn't always have to be dramatic or destructive. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to be used, refusing to play the role others have written for you. For years, I thought if I worked harder, if I tried to be perfect, maybe my parents would finally see me as worthy. But the truth is, their love was always conditional, tied to what I could give them or what Ethan could take. Breaking free wasn't easy. Walking away from their guilt and manipulation felt selfish at first. But in reality, it was the most selfless thing I could have done, for myself, for my future. The vineyard is gone. My parents live in a smaller house now, and Ethan's visionary dreams are little more than stories he tells at bars. But me. I wake up every morning in my cabin, the air crisp, the mountains quiet, and I know I chose myself. I built a life they said I could never have, without their approval, without their help, and certainly without their control. And that, more than anything, is the sweetest justice, living well on my own terms. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor, hit that like button. It tells me you love these kinds of real, emotionally charged stories of karma and justice. And now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have given your family the $200,000 to save the vineyard? Or would you have walked away the way I did? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Every week, I bring you more powerful, raw stories of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate payback. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Because sometimes, the best revenge really is living well.